Hey, welcome to Q&A, where you ask your questions on faith and life, and I do my best to give a biblical perspective. As always, you can ask your questions on slido.com. Use the hashtag ALC23. Would love to hear from you. Well, we have a question that follows on from our last Q&A, which proved to be very popular, where we talked about freedom of speech in relation to Posey Parker, and clearly a lot of people have very strong views on this, and I agree with most of you, and I agree with the comments that were posted. A number of you have messaged me directly, and I just want to be clear that I agree with most of you. I agree that what we saw was wrong, and we need to recognize where it's coming from and why. And today's question really helps us begin to get into that. So let me read the question, and then I'll explain why I think it's important to take this question. You mentioned at the end of your last Q&A a bit about competing worldviews and how they are at the center of a lot of conflict. Could you explain what you mean? Absolutely, because I really do believe that the reason that we are experiencing so much conflict, so much divisions, so much polarization in society today, Western society especially, is because we are seeing a clash of worldviews. There's been a significant shift away from what was a normative worldview until recently, whether it was a Christian or theistic or scientific worldview, irrespective of where you were on that spectrum. Traditionally, worldviews, and if you're not familiar with a worldview is simply the way that we account for life, meaning, and purpose, all of the big things in life that help us understand our world and our place within it, and how to live as a consequence. And irrespective of how your worldview was formed, as I said, whether it be a faith-based one or science or whatever it was one of the commonalities was this notion that truth is objective, that we don't create truth, that truth corresponds to objective realities. And as a consequence of that, it means that we have to wrestle with how we understand these realities, and there's room for divergent viewpoints, and there's room for tolerance, because we recognize that we're talking about the same thing, but we may be talking about it with a different emphasis from a different perspective, and that's okay. But we recognize that there are these objective realities, that truth is external to us, that we're not the center of the world, that we are part of the world, a significant part, but the world does not revolve around us. Reality does not revolve around us. Truth is not what we make it. So, for example, when Isaac Newton was sitting under the apple tree that time, having a rest, and an apple fell down, and he suddenly thought, why did that happen? And he came up with the theory of gravity, and he explained why apples fall and all those sorts of things. He didn't create gravity. He discovered what was already there and had already shaped the way that we lived. But in understanding this reality and naming it and giving us understandings of how it functions, we were then able to harness that and do things we'd never been able to do before. So whereas before no one ever thought that we would be able to fly because things always fall to the ground, understanding how gravity works and understanding other scientific principles, we could now utilize that to our advantage. But it was something that was already there. And the reason I say that is that classically worldviews, irrespective of the nature of it, as I say, was this idea that reality was external to us. Truth was objective as a consequence. Whereas today, what's happened is increasingly people have pushed back against that, because obviously if reality is external, that truth is objective, then it means that we have to conform to it. And that means that we have to face some things and deal with some things that we may feel uncomfortable, that we may not want to do. And so as a consequence, we've made truth objective. We talk about my truth as though you and I can have our own truths and that's fine. But it's not okay. Whether I believe in science or not, an apple is always going to fall from a tree. I don't get to determine the rules of science that regulate the world and how it works and how I have to live as a consequence. And that means that we don't get to categorize biology and gender and all those sorts of things in order to avoid dealing with uncomfortable feelings. We don't get to redefine categories and redefine truth to suit our preferences, to make us feel better about ourselves rather than dealing with things. And that's why I think it's important to recognize what's happened. You see, the reason that that freedom of speech has no currency anymore, really, because we've made truth subjective, and therefore when people talk about freedom of truth, it's really, you are free to speak what I want to hear, but you're not free to speak what I don't want to hear, because then I have to deal with something objective, something external, and if I give credibility to that, then it means I'm no longer in the center of my world, and therefore I'm no longer able to describe myself as whatever I want to describe myself as. If I was born a man and identify as a woman, now I have to deal with that and say, well, why do I deal with that? Why do I struggle with my identity? And instead of working through that and facing some hard realities and coming into a better place, I just redescribe reality to suit me. And that's why we have this conflict, because most of us still operate with these categories, these objective categories of reality and truth, and how they shape and define certain things. And that's important, because that's what's given tolerance up until now. Because it's objective, because it's external, I may have a view, you may have a view, but we recognize that it's okay to have a different perspective about this, about a reality. Whereas when it's subjectivized, when it's about my truth, then that all goes out the window, because if I'm going to acknowledge your perspective, then it calls into question mine. Because how can my truth be truthful if it's not true for everybody? So therefore, what it really amounts to is, unless you agree with me, you're wrong. Unless you share my view of reality, you're wrong. So tolerance goes out the window, because we don't want to face the uncomfortable truths that an objective reality places upon us. And that's why understanding worldviews and the shifts that have taken place are important. I encourage you to Google it, because it helps you understand how people think, and it can then shape some of the conversations that you have with people. Hopefully, with the goal of being able to break through some of the rhetoric that's going on and everything else. But yeah, that's why I said that's what's happened, is that we saw a clash of worldviews, and why there's no tolerance, because that's how I think the world's operating at the moment. We have a group of people who object, irrespective of where they are on the political, ideological, religious spectrum, who operate with this objective reality that we're not the center of the world. There is this correspondence between truth and reality, and then you've got this other group of people who are becoming increasingly vocal, who've made it subjective. It's my truth, and if it's my truth, it's therefore you must be wrong. And you know how it goes. So yeah, that's what I was getting at. Hope that I understand. I hope it unpacks that a little for you. Do your own research. Jump on the net, because it will give you some good insights and chart some good ways forward. But yeah, that's it for now. So until next time, God bless.